Hello, this is John Huey with my co-host Michael Tingley,
Hello.
and hi, and this is another episode of the Sober Atheist podcast. Today's episode is sort of unusual. Episode 6, entitled "Coping with Politics in the Context of Sobriety," and Michael has some very good ideas about this, which he's going to start sharing with you. So
Sure.
here we go.
All right. Yeah, we've had this discussion for a while now, coping with politics, because the political climate we're living through right now is very unique and very emotionally fraught. So yeah, this idea of politics, it starts for me in traditional AA and NA meetings. Any discussion of politics was pretty much forbidden. And, somebody would yell across the room if you brought up politics that it's an outside issue. And no one really wanted to discuss it. But I think anything that triggers the thoughts of drinking or even just the strong emotional responses to things, I think that's an inside issue. I think that's something that ought to be discussed. And for me, it's healthy for me to discuss it. I think that anything that triggers my desire to drink should be discussed, and it should be. I should be able to look at it and try to analyze why it is such an issue, and then find a positive, assertive way to avoid drinking over it. I think it's something important to talk about. And politics presents all these issues that potentially are sobriety threatening for me. Frustration, hopelessness, disappointment, depression, profound sadness, fear. All of these things are brought up by politics. And these are things that I spent a long time drinking over, trying to avoid those strong emotional feelings. I didn't really want to feel any of that stuff. Politics for me, I think part of the reason it does bring up all of those issues and why it is so frustrating and fearful and all these other ideas is because politics has become a belief. It's such a strong belief and a faith that I think it could almost be discussed as a religion. The Republicans have given us an example of this idea of politics being faith based, being a belief, as opposed to a rational, verifiable discussion about human behavior. This irrational belief that it's become is part of what's so frustrating about it. It's scary. It's when something is inarguable, like the belief in God, that you either believe or you don't. And I don't. And when politics have become such a strong belief, that's part of the difficulty for me, and the reason why it is so sobriety threatening, because it can't be argued. You can't argue with somebody who has such a strong belief, and that leads to a sense of hopelessness for me. And it's that hopelessness that triggers my past learned solution. What I did for the better part of my adult life. I drank a drug for a good solid 30 some years. And it was partially because it was a solution for me. When I felt that sense of hopelessness and fear and all those things I just listed, it triggers my idea of what I had learned to do. I get loaded on something. I get loaded on anything, and drop out, stop those feelings, and at least temporarily or even permanently remove myself from life. And this is critical stuff for me in sobriety, and it's all brought up by politics. it scares me that it is such a powerfully emotionally charged issue. You know, I have to remind myself of all the positive things that I've learned in sobriety. Whenever I'm confronted with politics or the discussion of politics, or even just paying attention, I have to remind myself what it is I do to keep from drinking again. And it's those positive things that I try to do. You know, I maintain a connection with other people that are also trying to stay sober. I talk about these issues. You know, I don't hide from these issues. I talk about and I'm honest about things that trigger my thoughts of drinking. You know, I don't hold that in. I think it's very important for me to share that kind of those feelings. You know, the secular recovery Zoom meetings have been amazing for me. I mean, that's where I can easily make those connections, the connections that I think are important to make with other people trying to stay sober. And you know, in the Zoom meetings that we attend, the secular Zoom meetings, there's nobody shouting across the room. That's an outside issue. Whenever we just talk about something, you know, and then you know, after making those connections and being honest about this stuff, I try to be a productive person. I try to do positive things. I try to stay positively active, doing things, you know, everything from volunteering to gardening and art making and just showing up for meetings. I think is a positive action that I can take to maintain my sobriety. All these things lead to my reaffirmation of abstinence and staying sober in spite of politics and in spite of this belief system that we're confronted with. I mean, it, you know, like I said, those feelings of frustration and hopelessness and fear, all of that, those are triggers for me. You know, I've learned over my 30 some years of drinking that I can easily avoid that stuff. You know, alcohol and drugs work for that. You know, and I have to remind myself that you know that there are better ways to deal with things, and but I have to be honest about it. I mean, I have to share it. I mean, I have to be honest about these being triggers. You know, and I think that these are issues that need to be brought up. They need to be discussed. You know, I think, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've had plenty of experiences in meetings in the past where, you know, things that were important to you or triggers that were important to you were shut down by the traditions of AA and NA. You know, there's a format, and if you stray from that format and talk about real things, you know, I mean, this is the kind of thing that we would talk about before and after a meeting, but never in a meeting. You know, what is your experience with these issues that are so emotionally charged? How do you deal with it?
Good question. You know, I personally don't feel that any of the chaos and disorder that currently reigns in the world is going to cause me to drink. It's not a personal issue for me, but my quality of life, which generally, you know, despite the infirmities of age and, you know, less than perfect issues, financial and others in my life, quality of life is very high for me here. And I feel from time to time my quality of life going down precipitously connected to some of these events. Now, I just want to say something parenthetically to some of our viewers. Not all of our viewers are from the United States. All right. So much of the chaos and disorder Michael and I are going to talk about are going to be the, you know, the chaos and disorder you see here on, you know, CNN or BBC or whatever media you're watching Sky or whatever media you're watching overseas. So, some of it, the specifics might not be directly applicable to you, and we apologize. Also, parenthetically, I think I need to say that uh, it's been my observation that most people on the atheist end of the spectrum tend to come from the left politically. I don't see, or I haven't encountered too many people on the right politically that share atheistic beliefs, although there are such people. It's well known that Christopher Hitchens had a distinct shift to the right end of the spectrum in the last years of his life. So it's not like there are no such people. Of course there are. But many of us come from that perspective on the left. And I am dismayed by the number of people that I see coming to the uh, secular pages, the secular recovery Facebook pages that I frequent and read quite a bit, who are in fact suffering from disturbances related to outside political events. Um, this podcast isn't just applicable to people in recovery. I think it might actually have some applicability to others who don't share our issues with alcohol and drugs, because these things have in fact eroded the quality of life for millions and millions and millions of us. That's pretty obvious. I just anecdotally, when I was a much younger man, you know, salesman wandering around Washington, D.C., which is the uh, area I still live in. I lived in the city for many years. And as a young salesman, I would visit the U.S. Capitol very frequently to work with the architect of the Capitol and the Capitol Police. And I was principally involved in, screening equipment for the Capitol complex and, working with the authorities there on, screening issues when they started screening for weapons and other things way back when. And I know every nook and cranny of that place. I walked those hallways frequently over a number of years, several years, going up and down there. And when I saw what happened in that place on January the 6th, I just took it very personally, very, it made a profound impact on me. On my regular Facebook page, I still have an image of the soldiers bivouac inside the Capitol building as my background image. Right? It really affected my overall quality of life when I saw that happen in our country. And I saw the nature of the people who committed those crimes. And now I have to sit here and listen to people on a regular basis telling us that those crimes weren't crimes.
Mm.
Okay. Last time I checked, hitting a policeman with a metal pole or using a stun gun on an officer when he's down and kicking him in the head and giving him brain damage was a crime. And we actually have people saying that those things aren't crimes. That sort of thing really affects my quality of life. When I see that there are millions of my fellow citizens that actually believe that causes difficulties. I wonder what's come of the country of my birth here in my declining years. It's it's not good. All right. But then on the flip side, I look at my life, the nature of my relationship with my wife, with my kids, with my environment, with the security and happiness that I've found as a sober person all these years, and the little bit that I can try to do to help others in this world of recovery, then, I've got this incredible dissonance in my life. It's not good. Yeah, I can't imagine what it might be doing to people who are feeling on edge about their drinking, wherever they are in the spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, if in my case, 18 and a half years sober, and, there aren't a lot of things that make me think about drinking. I mean, it's not like I'm on the verge of drinking, but it's still in my mind the solution to the hopelessness. That this sense of hopelessness that I get from paying attention is it's very troubling. And I do a lot of things to avoid feeling that sense of hopelessness. I try to concentrate on the positive things in my life too. But that sense of hopelessness still drives me inside. There's a little kernel of, man, I know the solution.
Yeah, I do.
And I have to put a lot of effort into not drinking. And it's
Yeah,
real
but
for me. It's there.
yeah, it's palpable. But also parenthetically, I have to say, I'm glad this is a podcast. Okay, this is not a meeting. All right,
Yeah, yeah.
I would never be going out there in a meeting discussing these things in this particular way because of the fact that some of these things are triggering. And, because of the fact, I mean, for example, despite being on the left, uh, in my career, I've had a lot of opportunity to go a lot of places. And I spent a lot of time working in Israel back in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. And I know all of those communities down by the Gaza. I've worked on the border at the border crossings into the Gaza. I know about the dangers of being on the West Bank. Um, I recall one day walking from my hotel down the beach in Tel Aviv to meet a friend for dinner way down the other end of the beach. I was staying at the Sheraton where all the Amerikanskis stay on one end of the beach, walking to the end of the other. And there's this walkway there. And I walked through this large crowd of kids queued up in front of a nightclub. And I was thinking to myself, this goes back to the earlier 2000s. I was thinking to myself, man, would this be one of the targets for them, right? I swear 4 or 5 weeks later, I was at home watching CNN when exactly the crowd in front of that club was blown up and dozens of people were killed right where I had been walking that night. So I got a different perspective on this stuff. And my perspective on that stuff would greatly upset a number of my friends on the left. So the reason I'm talking about this here now is that I've got to tell myself if I ever get close to this third rail stuff in the context of recovery, I've got to be careful because my opinions aren't necessarily reflective of others. And I've seen people on these recovery pages who are on the other end of the spectrum on this Gaza thing, who are really on the edge, on disturbed by this, which any human being would be. Of course, you're going to be disturbed seeing these images, seeing these things. But it's a matter of degrees, and people have different opinions on this. So I'm not, and please, I hope nobody's going to get us wrong that we're advocating that we have these types of extensive discussions in a recovery meeting. I'm pretty sure you agree with that, Michael. We should
Well, yeah, I mean
extensive.
the literal discussion of the politics, but I still think that the discussion of how much politics affects us is something that we need to be open and honest about. You know, I mean, I can understand not having a discussion about the specifics of Gaza, for instance, within the context of a sobriety meeting.
Yeah.
But the fact that that's going on, the sense of disappointment and the hopelessness and the profound sadness, those are things
Oh,
that should be
yeah.
discussed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have people we know who are in our atheist recovery meetings who live way out. I won't mention the states even, but way out deep in Trump country. I think maybe even you live in Trump country, Mike. But way
Do indeed.
deeper into you know, into the hardcore areas of America where they really have to be concerned about their safety and their jobs and their, standing in the community and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
By talking about, you know, anything to do with their true political beliefs or their lack of spirituality. And when I hear them talking about what they have to go through, I mean, I live here in probably one of the most liberal communities in the United States. It's, Bethesda, Maryland. I mean, 95% of my neighbors voted the correct way the last time. See, I'm talking about correct. Okay,
My neighborhood's probably the opposite.
the opposite, right? Well,
Yeah.
I often talk about my congressman, who's Jamie Raskin. I'm very proud of living in Jamie's congressional district. But I mean, I live in a bubble. The rest of America doesn't live in it. A lot of it doesn't live in the bubble outside of the big cities.
Oh yeah, I mean the previous jobs that I had. I mean, I'm fortunately I'm retired from all my corporate responsibilities, and but previously I wouldn't have been able to discuss my political perspective or my religious perspective. Those things were kept to a bare minimum, and even in the face-to-face meetings I used to go to, I never really talked about either of these things, politics or religion.
Right.
Never brought up. So in spite of them being really critical issues for everybody on the planet, I mean, I don't understand why we
Right.
have to restrict ourselves
Oh,
so much.
well, no, we shouldn't restrict it, but I wanted to make a few sort of caveats in this whole thing because uh, you know, I'm I'm capable of being very definite about things. And I have to be sort of aware of my environment, particularly when I'm in one of those meetings. But that's not the case here. I mean, anybody who's been triggered has probably already turned this thing off. So I don't think we posing any particular threat here on this podcast. But the environment is very threatening to people in recovery, particularly people who are new, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
because when you're new, it's just my opinion, you should not be engaged particularly when you're brand new. You shouldn't be engaged in a lot of worry or upset about these political issues because your very survival, it depends on trying to get your footing and your foundation in abstinence. And I actually had somebody recently who was struggling, who started talking to me about all of this stuff that had upset them, or the dissonance about, you know, how can the world be such a difficult and terrible place sometime? And I said, wait a minute, okay? All that stuff is true, but at this point in your life, the thing you need to be concerned about, if at all possible, 100%, is not taking that first drink or taking that first drug or whatever your Jones happens to be. So
And
these things are,
I
yeah,
think that requires a certain limitation on honesty. Being totally honest can be very dangerous, and it can be alienating. So yeah, I think especially in early sobriety, you're trying to make a connection and you're trying to be accepted by a community of sobriety. So you've got to be careful. You have to limit the amount of honesty that you're willing to put out there.
right.
I mean, I
And
know I did. I did. You know.
yeah, and I mean, certainly in a professional context, I I don't care now. I may actually put this podcast on my I don't put many of my recovery things on my personal Facebook page, but I may actually put this podcast up on my personal page once we're done with it, because I think it has a wider applicability. But most certainly, when I was actively engaged in business, I mean, working 60, 70 hours a week, hustling to make a DC level living to support a family in the style to which they had unfortunately become accustomed, I couldn't and wouldn't expose any of my beliefs about almost anything,
Mm.
because these things can be risky to people. So we're sort of in an enviable position, being somewhat exempt. I do a few things overseas, but I don't think the guys really care. The guys I do business with now really care about this sort of stuff. But most certainly, when I was in the corporate world as a younger person, I mean, this kind of stuff could be like fatal to you there.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't. I was turned down for jobs because of my refusal to claim to be a Christian. I mean,
Right, right.
when I did get jobs, I had to be careful about where I was treading with my
Well,
honesty
no,
about being an
I
atheist.
right. I don't think either one of us are advocates for universal honesty about, well, in my case, both my atheism and my socialism. That is a double whammy.
Yeah.
I joked in a presentation once up in Canada when I said, "Oh, I'm an atheist," and I said, "Oh, I'm a socialist." I said, "Oh my God, what did I just say?" I said, "Oh, I forgot. I'm up in Canada now. I can say it. I'll probably get away with saying I'm a socialist." But yeah, we've got to be careful about that stuff. But also, I don't think within as you mentioned, within the context of the recovery community, whatever that context is, I don't think enough attention is paid to the effect that this stuff has on people in recovery or sobriety. It's not the literal beliefs or ideas themselves, it's the effect of circumstance. And what do we do to cope with circumstance? How do we deal with it? We've got many years in this thing. How does somebody who's new deal with it? Who's just kind of holding on to their sobriety in a tenuous kind of way, in an initial kind of way, uh, just getting their bearings. What does this outside chaos and disorder do to them? I don't think it's good.
It's a challenge, definitely a challenge. I think it's fortunate that we have the internet today,
Right.
that where people can find like-minded people. They can find groups where you can freely discuss and be honest. I think that's part of the blessing that I have found with the secular Zoom meetings is that I've found a place, a format where I can be honest, and I don't have to worry about whether I'm treading on a certain step. If I'm not abiding by the right way of looking at things. I can be honest, and I think people who are new to sobriety, I think they're especially the younger generation. I think they're taking advantage of the abilities that they have on the internet, and for the sake of finding sobriety, I mean, it is important to find a group of people that you can identify with and be honest with.
Right. And
Yeah,
to find the right environment to be in and identify with. I mean, Michael, we are in a world right now where I watch too much CNN. I mean, I got a CNN problem. I got too much information, right? But frequently when they're interviewing people way out in the deep recesses of Trump people, those people get on and they will tell you honestly, right in your face, that they believe that Donald Trump was sent by God. Okay.
yeah, and even if not at that extreme, it's still a belief that it's more important to have a Republican president than it is to have a Democrat president,
Well,
and that's just a belief.
right,
It
right,
doesn't matter what the
right,
candidate has done. It doesn't matter about him at all. It's just more important that there's a Republican,
right.
and that is in fact a faith. That's a belief, and it's an inarguable position, and that's what's so frustrating about it and
And
depressing about it. You can't argue that.
it's
It's a belief.
insane. It's insane. On the front page of this morning's Washington Post was an extensive article, which I think I'm going to post this evening. And it details literally dozens of women who've been assaulted by that person,
Yeah,
going back 20 and 30 years. These women are so distressed by what could happen to them if they go public about their encounters with this person that they have had to form private Zoom support groups amongst themselves
yeah,
to try to deal with the potential consequences of them revealing the actual abuse that they sustained, because they want to tell their stories, but they're scared, they're frightened,
no, yeah, you know,
with good reason.
yeah,
And that's the world we're living in. I mean, and it's like, I think of that 50s world I was brought up in, and I mentioned my liberal Republican mom who accepted my atheism at a very young age. And when I think of the world that I was raised in, and it was certainly not a liberal, you know, overwhelmingly liberal environment like I live in today. But what I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis in the political realm in the United States was impossible then. Impossible on any end, only on the weirdest, furthest end of the spectrum, like the John Birch Society. And we had people back then that said the communists had put fluoride in the water. Remember that? Fluoride for the kids' teeth was
yeah.
put in the water by communists to undermine our well-being. But that kind of crazy, but not like mass crazy,
Yeah.
like where I have to look at numbers and think, are there really 73 million people who are that fucking crazy? I mean, that's not good for my
Well,
old
yeah,
brain.
because it isn't
Are there
crazy.
really?
it's a belief, it's a faith. I mean, if you're
Well,
that's the problem. There's
I,
no
you
there's no
know,
rationalization. There's no argument involved. There's no verifiable evidence to support the position.
I,
It's
I,
just
it's
strictly
like
faith based,
I,
and that's what's scary because and that's what's so hopeless about it, and that's the fear is because there's nothing you can do about a faith. It's a belief. You either have it or you don't. And too many of those people have that faith. That's what's scary about it, man.
well, I've been accused by someone very close to me, who I no longer speak to, for as a atheist and a liberal, I am actively undermining the moral center of the United States and am engaged in the destruction of my own country, which in my own weird way, I guess I've always very deeply loved. I mean, my dad,
And then where's the evidence of that? Where's the concrete
there's
evidence
no
that you're
evidence.
doing
It's
that?
like, you know,
Yeah, there's no evidence.
Joe Biden is the greatest threat to democracy ever. I mean,
Okay, well, show me the
poor
evidence.
Joe is a nice man, a old time Democratic Paul. I think maybe he loves banks in Delaware a little bit too much, but because they were very responsible for helping him out financially in the past. But certainly nothing even remotely like a threat to the nation, where a real threat to the nation may actually, and this is where it gets very deep for some of us, a real threat may actually be President of the United States again. That's an actual possibility, which is, it's, I mean, it's almost to the same level. We thought it was impossible in 2016.
Yeah,
Didn't many of us think it was
yeah. It was
impossible?
shocking, and
It was ridiculous.
there's a paradigm shift in all of that.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
and then again, that brings up fear, man. I mean, there's just so much fear that revolves around all the political system, and that's what's partially so triggering for me. I mean, I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to have this fear. And what do you do about it? How do you cope with that fear? How do you cope with that 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 depression, this profound sadness about the situation, and
well,
and the fact
it's
that you can't really do much about it. That's
no,
another
and
thing.
the
The
fact that,
frustration.
right.
Frustration is another powerful trigger for me. I mean, it's like, man, I mean, how do you cope with that, John? How do you?
Oh, well, it's the worst part is, as you know, my wife is much younger than I am. And I had my kids sort of late in life. And, my oldest daughter just turned 30 and the youngest turned 28. And they're going to be around decades and decades longer than me. And what in the hell could happen to them if this thing goes all the way bad on us?
Hmm.
Worse than it is now. All right. How could it, what that worries me, and how I deal with that is I kind of have to block that part out and hope for the best, because I go down that road, it's certainly not going to help their quality of life for me to constantly be telling them, oh, I'm so worried about your future and what can happen and this and that. I can't go down that road with them a lot. I have to be very happy with their accomplishments and their ability and their success at dealing with the world. I'm here to be supportive of them in that way, not to transfer my fear about an unknowable future to me, because, you and I won't know that. All right. We
Yeah.
have no way of knowing that. So, I mean, I don't want to come around to some sort of programming language here in the midst of this. But a lot of this we sort of have to accept. I
Yeah.
mean, to be able to continue as reasonable people in recovery trying to do the best that we can. Because the alternative is just too grim. I mean, I'm not I'm not the, you know, smiley, chatty, happy recovery guy, which probably is why we won't have 100,000 listeners. Oh, I love the kitty stuff they said.
He
But
showed up.
that's fine. The cat can come in. All right. But you know, I don't want to impart a sense of doom to anyone, particularly people that are dealing with sufficient amounts of doom in their life already. Okay?
Sure.
I mean, shit. When I think back to December 1986 when I was having my final crash, the word doom does come into the picture, doesn't it? I mean, you know, when we think about where we were at when we were coasting down to the point where we had actually had to make a decision about our drinking and using, that's doom, okay? All right? And, you know, I got a lot of friends that went down to their doom that way. So I don't want to sort of promote or propound any sort of, you know, theory or environment that leads people to that sort of thing. But at the same time, we've got to talk about the practical reality
Yeah.
of where we are.
Yeah.
Where
Well,
are we?
yeah, I think it's important, no matter how much sobriety you have, to just be honest about it. You know, I be honest about the things that are affecting you, and share that with other people. You know, I try not to hold these things in. I try to make sure that I'm honest about what triggers my dark thoughts. You know, I instead of just hiding them. You mentioned the word acceptance. Yeah, that's a big part of it. You know, I accept the fact that I have this kernel in my brain that says, you know, a pint of Jack Daniels would be really nice. I wouldn't feel all this shit going down. You know, I wouldn't worry about it. I can curl up in a fetal position and pretend that the world doesn't
Well,
exist.
numbing
And
the
and because I know that place very well,
right,
you know.
right.
But so the alternative to that is to first of all just be honest about it. I mean, I feel stronger in my sobriety as soon as I say that. As soon as I'm honest about the fact that thought still occurs to me. It's there. And I have to be honest about it and say, look, this, I do think about that, you know, and regardless of how many years you have, if you're just honest about that, you're going to be a lot safer by being honest and expressing it and sharing it with other people. And then jointly coming to the conclusion that it's still a hell of a lot better to not pick up that drink, you
Oh
know,
no, yeah,
and
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, just think of the, you know, the I mean, we use the word despair. Uh, you know, I drinking for me would take me directly, and I know this to be the fact. Drinking for me would take me directly to apocalyptic doom. I
yeah,
wouldn't have to wait for things to go totally bad in Ukraine or, you know, the Christian fascists to finally take over completely the government of the United States or, you know, any other apocalyptic scenario one could concoct. Actually, I've been in places where apocalyptic scenarios play out. For example,
mm-hmm.
Russia. I first was invited there to discuss some technologies I was working on, unclassified security technologies. back in 2004. And I lived there. I was engaged there between 2004 and 2013, but in the midst of that, lived there for about 5 years. And when I first went there in 2004, I saw a number of Democratic TV outlets, at least two good ones, some very good papers that were doing very good work on corruption and other issues there, a civil society that was getting freer for people like gay people, for example. They were doing better than they had under the previous Soviet regime. And things seemed to be, even though things were very dangerous and very problematic, and a lot of other, awful things could happen there, things seemed to maybe have the hope for going toward an upward trajectory. But come 2012 and the reactions to the demonstrations of 2012 and the increasing repressions and horrible, horrible things happening there, I actually watched a place that was on a possibly liberal upswing swing completely over to the other direction, where they are a prisoner of nationalist, militarist, religiously inspired. The Russian Orthodox Church is one of Putin's biggest allies there. Situation where I heard about them beating up gay people in Moscow, raiding gay clubs and beating people last week, right? And the few liberal political outlets and media outlets that remain are gone, and the people that are involved are either dead or in gulag or in exile. And they are quite possibly going to start a nearly apocalyptic ground war in Europe. And that's bad news, okay? But I get up every morning. I live in the United States of America, where, as difficult as it is, we're not there yet. And with any luck and any faith in our people and our population, we won't ever get there. But considering that person and how close he is to people like Putin and that Hungarian Viktor Orban and others around the world, including his dear buddy Kim Jong-il, things could go that way. But we're not there today. So sitting here this evening, Michael, we're still, comparatively speaking, rather fortunate folks.
So you're still capable of holding on to some optimism.
There is a core belief in me somewhere that there is enough rationality left in the world to right this ship in this country. I have a belief that that's possible. Now, between now, we're sitting here, May the 13th, 2024. Come November of this year, my opinion may have to shift again. I don't know. It's frightening. All right.
Yeah.
It's affecting the quality of my life.
So bottom line, ultimately, how do you cope with politics in sobriety?
Carefully, if I can, because I'm not a careful person by my very nature when it comes to these issues. And, when I'm dealing with people who are struggling with their recovery, it's certainly not something I would lead with or try to impart in any way, but it's part of the general environment that I have to acknowledge. So if this kind of stuff can hammer me as much as it does certain days, I've got to be cognizant of others who say quite reasonably that this could be a threat to their sobriety
Mhm.
and try to support them any way I can. I mean, you talked about in your little essay you're going to post on our Facebook page. By the way, there will be a essay supporting this podcast on the Facebook page that Michael's written that he's going to pop up after this thing posts. That this can be threatening to you, as solid as you are.
Yeah, at 18 and a half years of sobriety, and feeling pretty good about being sober, I can't. Yeah, I mean, how is it for somebody who's brand new? I mean, it's emotionally charged issues are tough to deal with, no matter how many years you're sober.
Well,
It's the reality of it. It's a
right,
challenge. It's a
right.
challenge.
And there are societal trends in areas other than alcohol too. I mean, when we think of the spike in fentanyl use. Now,
Oh yeah, everything, man. Yeah.
I've never shot myself up with fentanyl,
A lot of
obviously.
avoidance behaviors
Right.
are on the rise. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
when I hear it described, I hear fentanyl as being described as something that immediately shuts everything down, like
Yeah, yeah.
the curtain lowers,
It's
like,
as close to death as you can get,
yeah,
and
it's a,
often is death. But
yeah,
that's the whole point of it, to be
right,
that close.
right, to
Yeah, yeah.
obliterate. And where are we when we have uh, increasing numbers of people seeking out that sort of instant oblivion?
Hmm.
We always have us alcoholics that like to get loaded, but that tends to be a sort of a more lengthy process. But this fentanyl stuff, we got kids here right in our county here in Maryland that are dying of that stuff. All right. That's something that we in the recovery area need to be focusing on. And I think somehow, in a weird way, this crazy environment that we've been living in, and and then we had the pandemic come in 2020 and sort of you know blow up the world in a different kind of way. I think it's incumbent upon many of us that live and work in this community to figure out more reasonable and compassionate ways to deal with people in the midst of chaos. If I had an extra 20 years, I might devote more time than I've got to trying to figure out how to give these messages to people in the midst of all this chaos.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. It's
Well,
not,
I identify with that desire to remove yourself from life. You mentioned fentanyl, and I've been addicted to a lot of drugs in the past, and I identify with that. I understand that desire to be as close to death as possible. Every bottle of booze, every bag of dope I ever did, that was my choice. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be as close to death as possible. So I understand that. And the political environment, it leads to that thought, that I'd like to just drop out and forget about all this stuff going on. And that's what's scary about politics. It is an emotional trigger for me. But ultimately, I cope with politics in sobriety. Uh, um, in spite of the emotionally charged trigger that it is for me, I simply stay connected. And this is my my offer to people early in sobriety. This is what's kept me sober this long, and what's working for me and a lot of other people. ultimately, I stay connected to the sober community. I think that's very important to stay connected to the sober community, which in turn keeps me connected to the community, to the rest of my community. Everything I do out there in the world, in the real world, I can stay connected to that, and ultimately, all of that helps me to confirm my abstinence, my desire to stay abstinent. It is reaffirmed every time I make that connection with other people in sobriety. And it's pretty simple, and I think that's the message that we're trying to promote here is that, just stay connected. And, in spite of all the stuff going down, and be honest about the fact that it is a trigger and that it is an emotionally charged issue, and accept that, and be honest about it, but turn to other people in sobriety and stay connected with them and share that concept with them. Be honest with them,
Right.
and I think that's ultimately what I want to promote is stay connected and stay abstinent.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea would be to be mature, responsible, abstinent, and try to the best of your ability to maintain an attitude that includes uh, at least a modicum of hope and forward-looking, progressive in the best kind of way, uh, uh, methodologies that lead you to a better life within recovery, despite what we're dealing with in the outer world,
Yeah, there you go.
right? We want to try to have a little uplift and a little, what's the word? Hope, right,
Hope
Michael?
is good, man.
Right,
Yeah,
Mo?
yeah, yep.
And we have come to the end of our time with our friends here today. So I guess we've got to sort of cruise on to the end of this thing in our usual way,
All right,
and hope to see our friends again soon. We're going to have one of our sober friends on as a guest from the great country of Canada next time out,
all right.
and we'll be meeting him on the happy road here rather soon.
Excellent.
And we hope that, I'm sure we didn't give anybody any solutions, but at least I hope we had a rational, productive discussion. And we will end in our usual progressive and a positive way
Yeah.
by saying what?
Peace and love, baby. Peace and love.
And peace and love to you. We'll see you all soon. Bye now.